Morning. How is everybody? Good? I have not had a chance to post the grades or the bonus points for the post-test as I've given those to my graduate assistant who's still entering them into the spreadsheet, so I'll get those up just as soon as I can. For those of you who are not here on Tuesday, I handed back the first exam. I don't generally bring those with me. A second time, if you want them, you can come to my office. At the end of the class, I will take up the first exam. Scantrons, I have to have those back. If I don't get them back, I will have to give you a 0, and that won't be good for you. So make sure that I get them back in my hot little hands so that I don't have to go ahead and enter a 0 after I notice that they didn't turn them back. Today we're going to talk about one of the other foundational disciplines of marketing, and that's psychology. Psychology, as an academic discipline, was born of two different major fields, economics and psychology. And consumer behavior is a huge portion of the marketing discipline. Understanding what it is that people want, right? Figuring that out, and how do we do that? And understanding what they need. And that process that they go through in buying products and services is enormously important. So for today's critical thinking challenge in your groups, I want you to consider this question. 3 questions, actually. How many decisions a day does the average person make regarding food? Second, how did your group calculate the average number of choices a person makes in a day regarding food? What did you use as your calculation for your formula? And then third, what do the above 2 questions have to do with consumer behavior? There are at least 2 ways that your group can win today's critical thinking challenge. One is absolutely objective. It is the group that comes up with the number that is closest to the actual number of choices the average person makes in a day regarding food will win bonus points for today's critical thinking challenge. The rest of you can win if you come up with a really good response to how you calculated those choices or how did the above 2 questions deal with consumer behavior. So I'll let you get in your groups and think about that for about 10 minutes. Then I'm going to have you come up, elect a person to come up to the board and put your number up there, put an example of your formula, stand there at the board and tell us how you came up with it and what it has to do with consumer behavior. So I'll give you about 10 minutes for that, and we'll come back in just a few minutes. All right, so let's see, the A team. Stand up. Who's your team leader for today? And tell us how you came up with your decision.
About 210 decisions, and we decided by multiplying 21 decisions by 10 times a day. So, for example, what do we want to eat? Are we hungry? What type of food do we want to eat? Are we going to make it? Are we going to dine in or take it out? Are we going to eat with somebody? Are we going to get an appetizer, dessert? Is it going to go straight to our butts and our thighs? Do we need to take medicine for our heartburn? Is it healthy? Do we want to supersize? What are we going to drink with it?
Okay, so we came up with 210. And how does this relate to consumer decision making?
Because it mostly relates to our lifestyle. How we live and how we want to live affects what the decisions that we make every day.
Okay, very good. The American-Canadian connection. Base your peer group so that you can be seen in the video.
We just took like our average number of how many times we think a day and then like average it up. So we got 12. I just think it's how depends on who you are, if you're like big, small, whatever. But it has to do with
So what you're saying is that large people make more decisions. we can look at the size of the person and determine how many decisions they're making.
some people that are interested aren't going to think about things.
Okay, all right.
And then even though we know we need to do something, our mind is constantly thinking about what we could be doing or what we feel like doing. It's constantly going.
Okay. Let's see. Prestige worldwide.
I just said about 200 or more a day, also just because we have 5 senses and about 5 meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert. And A is a random variable depending on the number of daily social interactions you have. And that gives you about 200 or more. So if you're out in public, you're walking by more restaurants, you're talking to more people, there's more interactions. There's more of a chance that you're going to think about food more often if you're out in public doing stuff. And I was just saying, you make decisions all the time, unconsciously, without doing it, and it's just going on in your mind when you're walking by the food, at the food court or at the Walmart. You have stuff going on through your head.
Okay, so stay there for just 1 second. You came up with 5 based on the census. That's interesting because that's a really rational analysis, because what is the biggest thing that affects whether or not you like a food? I think it's smell, yeah. It actually, most of what you think you're tasting is actually smell. You have very few actual tastes. It's sour, sweet, salty, sugary, basically. Everything else is kind of a smell. And also, you wouldn't think of feel as being part of that, but it actually is, because texture is enormously important. That's why a lot of people don't like certain foods. It's because they have texture issues, and they may suffer from a slight case of sensory integration disorder. So, okay, so that's really interesting. Very good. The 6. Oh, and why did you say it's related to consumer behavior?
Just because it's something that you do all the time, not just when you make good decisions, but when you're shopping, you have thoughts that you make on others and patterns and all that.
Good. The 6 marketeers.
We said 202 decisions a day. We base this off of conscious and unconscious decisions throughout your day that you make. It varies depending on your environmental factors, including like how much you're outside of your house, or what restaurant is close to your house, your residency, you have food at your house, or so like just numerous factors like that. We think it relates back from a marketing standpoint. You have to be aware of your consumers' behavior in order to stand out and attract those consumers to come back and get your product.
Okay, so how does the food court, for example, try to stand out and attract you?
Like giving out samples.
Giving out samples.
All that like malls and stuff, the good samples to try to attract consumers to buy the food, or like advertisements like outside of buy one get one half off or stuff like that.
Okay, very good. Spiked punch. Haven't they made you go twice, Sam?
I think it's like a third time.
Did the rest of them not want to talk? I'm just asking. If they're making you go do too much work, let me know so I can insist that. All right.
Okay, so we said about 80 times. People think about food when they're hungry, when they're bored, when they see someone eating, driving past it, smelling it. So we just guessed about 80. We said it has everything to do with our consumer behavior. We think about food and other needs constantly, and these decisions drive influence over our decisions. For example, going to a mall, if you're going to be there all day, you kind of want to think about, like, food's a necessity, so we think, well, what good restaurants are at the mall? Like, where can we eat if we're at the mall all day? So we think of that.
All right, very good. Master marketers.
So we came up with 60. We kind of had a formula for it. So if you take we said you'll have over a day. Timely decisions per meal, maybe 3 equals result decisions, and then we factor through it like 5 decisions, 5 stages in decision making. So things about like price, I make the right decision, or and
Okay, very rational, comprehensive formula there. And how does it affect consumer decision making?
Well, it has to do with marketers. They have to make their products appealing and all that, like their opinion and imagination. So just make the feelings of consumers.
Okay, very good. The coffee and cream team.
Okay, so we actually set up the number a little bit because we think about, I put 45, give or take. Whenever we think about food, like we're looking at like a bird's eye view, like do I want to eat, what do I want to eat, and of course some people are going to think about food and others, depending on how busy they are. Like as a student, I think about food a lot, but like the woman in nursing home who has health needs and stuff probably won't think as much about food.
food based on factors such as income, if you're picky, hunger intensity, exposure to advertisements and from the outside world, your environment, if you're in the house all day, maybe you're not going to think about food as much if you're out and about. Leisure time, a lot of people will eat their free time or they're bored. And occupation, I work in a restaurant, so I feel a little more than when I used to work in retail. And these factors are going to be based on people's the psychological level of people and the personal level, like anorexic people, for example, are personally affected by it and stuff like that. For number 3, I have that consumers in developed countries are highly responsive to external stimuli, like whenever they're driving and they see advertisements, they want to eat more, like a trucker whenever they're driving down the interstate and they see like advertisements and billboards and stuff for go eat here and stuff like that. They want people to try it. Their environment, like I noted up there, and the contentness of their well-being, and I included Maslow's pyramid, I'm sorry, and it's a pyramid that describes like people's well-being. If their bottom ones aren't met, then they're not going to be able to like feel content personally. And so whenever, like for example, at the fair, when you're walking down and like you see all the food options and stuff, the person who has like a better sense of well-being isn't going to eat as crappier foods than like say like a person who doesn't care and like wants to eat more, kind of doesn't really have a sense of content.
You have some interesting things going on here. First of all, one of the things that I think that's really interesting, what you pointed out, is that some people don't have decision-making food. So for example, if you're in a nursing home, in assisted living, your food decisions are going to be made by an organization, and that goes into organizational buying behavior, which we'll talk about next time. And so, yeah, you're limited in options. If you're stuck and you're in a bed and you can't move and they're bringing it to you, the number of decisions you're making about your food have been greatly decreased. So I think that's a really interesting observation, and one that ties into how we make business decision making.
And I'm trying to include that health is a really big factor in how we
Okay. The Patriots?
For question number 1, we said at least 20. Question number 2 will be average at least 3 meals a day, and right around 5 meals a student for what you want to eat, and at least 2 beverages a day. Plus snacking in between, so that's how number. And for number 3, consumers make decisions depending on the taste of their life and the lifestyle, work, school, the economic standing, like what they can afford. And when they go to buy food, like they see different food around grocery stores and restaurants, that's what makes it.
Okay, it's interesting that you all included beverages in this, because a lot of people, when they think about food, I think we drink sort of the same thing over and over and over again, don't we? Most people. Don't you have sort of one thing that you drink all the time? Coffee, Coke, something like that. Whatever your favorite soda, carbonated beverage is. But that's increasing, right? The number of decisions that you're actually making about food in terms of caloric intake, because the number of beverages that are out there on the market has increased exponentially over the last 10 years, right? Right. Right, you can choose, you can get Diet Coke with vanilla or cherry and stuff like that, so that increases. Okay, very good. Number 9, what are you? The markers, okay.
We chose 210 decisions. We calculated that by probably roughly have about 7 really big meal times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Some of y'all are running breakfast, and I have just a snack or something. And we also have a couple times a day where you're eating snacks or you're eating maybe one other drink kind of stuff. So we decided that during those 7 times, you have about 30 decisions you have to make, comprised of where do you want to eat, what do you want to eat, what do you want to drink, how much do you want to eat, what's the price going to be, and just really think. And you go to like a restaurant, you sit down, you have an entire menu, you have to decide what you want. You decide what you didn't want, and then you go, where can I do you want to refill? What you have to decide, do you want to refill, all that kind of stuff. And most of the time, you're not going to think about it because you're going to go, yes, I want to refill, because you always want to, so you've already decided that. But there's all those decisions, so it's probably getting had about, we really thought about 30 choices. So you multiply those together, we got 210. So we thought that those are, it's pretty important because, especially with marketing, because during those 210 decisions, a marketer is going to have a choice to really sit down and get you to choose their product over another one, or choose more of their product over another one. So we thought it was very important to that.
Okay. I like the calculation. That's a great way of thinking about it. I think if you think about it from the standpoint that you all did in 210 decisions, and you think about something as simple as food, something that we think is really pretty ordinary, right? Think about any more complex products and the number of decisions that are going to be made in that product. Because food is not something that I think that we think is a terribly complex or risky choice for the most part. So, okay, very good. STC. Small town connection. Okay.
So we came up with 215, but we came up with that because we just started talking about like a random trip to McDonald's, and so you have to decide, first of all, when you pass it or if you're going to stop, do you want to take it to go, do you want to eat there, do you need to call a friend, and like we had to start talking about what we're going to get, so we averaged out 35 different choices, and we put you eat 6 times a day for like your 3 meals and 3 snacks. So that's what I mean. We really did all the different types of questions you ask yourself because I don't want to say nothing.
So you thought about not only what you're going to eat, but how you're going to eat it, in terms of are you going to take it in the car, get it to go through the drive-through. That's an interesting choice. The other thing that's interesting is that you came up with 6 meals a day. Historically, what did people eat? 3 meals a day. When did we start deciding that there were 6 meals a day? How'd you come up with 6?
We just started talking about dropping the breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then like, oh, well, what do you snack today, or do you want a snack instead? I wish you snack, whether it's like a candy bar, a vending machine, or maybe like something I'm really gonna have to do. We got it all those.
All right, very good. Tai Chi.
We got 25 decisions today, 3 meals and 2 snacks for 5 different decisions. Like who you're going to eat with and where you're going to eat and what you're going to eat and how much. Something like that. And some consumers' behaviors are all about the decisions you make, like this decision. Like what you're going to eat will affect on when you buy something in the market. Yeah.
Okay, do you think that there are ways that you choose in that, since you came up with a low number, do you think that it's basically a limited decision set from which you choose? Do you think that you consciously limit the decision set in order to deal with the complexity of the choices that you have? Because you all have an obviously very low number compared to, I think, everybody else. Well, no, there's 22. Okay. Okay. All right. Gen X?
All right, we came up with 240 decisions. There's roughly about 5 people in the family. And this is, like, if you go out. People eat around 4 times a day with, like, snacks, breakfast, dinner, lunch. In my opinion, most people stick to around the same things that they get. Like, they go out to eat, they don't really venture out when they pick what they want to eat. So there's at least 3 options. So take 5 people times 4 meals, and then taking the 4 meal times 3 options of 12. It also depends on how much money and time you have for the meal, and if you have kids with you, you might have to make decisions for them. And then the number 3, it has to do with constraints on the customers and how the companies have to factor in those when it comes to marketing plans for the products.
Okay. One of the things that you guys chose to focus on that's interesting is this idea of there are this number of people in the family and how that affects the decision-making process. Because obviously it does. Other people influence whether or not you're eating out or if you're eating at home. If you've got kids that you've got to feed, you might be more interested, for example, in health concerns than someone who's single and works 60 hours a week. So I think that's interesting. All right, very good. The Mark Avengers.
You said, we made about 22 decisions on food. And that comes from food was day, about 5 decisions, what you're gonna eat, where, how, why. And you've got the consumer, we're making all these decisions every day, so as a marketer, you have to analyze that. Figure out, trying to persuade, say yes to your product.
Okay, so again, you all came up with a low number. You think that people basically limit their decision set?
Yes.
That may be true from particularly if we look at things like, the market share. McDonald's has something like 80% of the market share of the fast food industry, right? The remaining choices, that really tells us a lot about the reduction in the data set that we use. The remaining choices are very small, actually. And the market share that they compete for is pretty small, okay? All right, money makers. Now this is going to be an interesting justification. An infinite number. So we've gone from really small numbers, 25, 22, to an infinite number.
We said that all the opportunities that you get, vending machines, fast food gas stations, restaurants, grocery stores, etc. And then you have to take into consideration the different brands, which, there's tons of different brands in each thing, whether it be noodles, milk, or whatever. And then the type of meal, whether you're going for an American meal or a Hispanic meal or, whatever. And then what food, whether you're wanting breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or a snack. And so we thought the combinations were going to be infinite. You can combine, even between food things, like, they're not food things. All the things you have at home, you can come up with numerous different combinations. Like, we're in college, I might want pizza for breakfast and a bowl of cereal. Not pancakes and eggs. Like, my combinations are, different combinations. And then we said consumers are being marketed to constantly, and so they always have to be making decisions.
Okay, very good. So you came up with an infinite number. I'd never thought about an infinite number, but I guess it is true.
And all the combinations.
Yeah, if you think about, the differences, for example, in the South, one of the things that's very popular is steak and eggs for breakfast, right? I went to New York to visit my brother this summer. Try to find some place that serves steak and eggs for breakfast. It's hard to find. Or, biscuits and gravy. It's like impossible. I found one place in New York that served it, and they served turkey gravy with the biscuits. And it was totally disgusting. It was just like, I almost didn't want to have biscuits and gravy again. So an infinite number. Okay. So let's see. Who had number 15? We didn't get it. We forgot the name.
I forgot the name. We're creative concept.
Creative concept. Okay.
Okay, so our number is number 15, and we did this with like the average person. The average meals that a person eats is 5, of course, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and little snacks in between. And then we said, and then there's like 5 choices of what type of food you may want to eat, the previous group, like American, Mexican, Italian, whatever it is, and then like just 10 choices. So we're just very basic, and that's how we got that. And as far as the consumer behavior, we just pretty much thought that these numbers show us patterns, and patterns show market/industry trends, and these trends tell us how and what people are buying.
Okay, that's very good. Very creative. Also, I think it shows how, if you look at those patterns in the industry trends, that again can translate into B2B marketing in terms of what you're going to market to the various restaurants and things. I would submit to you that there are probably differences between what they're selling, what U.S. Foods is selling in Oklahoma versus New York or California. The number of stuff that they have. All right. And we have the bow tie boys.
42 decisions each meal, so very rational. And I think we're exposed to food everywhere we go by advertisements. Even in class, we market each other to what kind of foods we eat. And I just think that through all this, that, yeah, I'm not a big disagree with that.
But you got a large number. Okay. All right. And came up with 250. Okay. It's interesting that you all came up with big numbers because the average person, we're going to watch a video in a minute, tells you that they made about 14 choices.
Ooh, yeah.
That's not what the correct answer is, though. It's not 14. So there's scientific ways. The fact that the average person thinks that's what they made is not necessarily it. So this focuses on what this discussion does is it looks at the decision-making process. Historically, what we've looked at in economics, the intersection of economics and psychology, is the idea of rational actor theory. Now, economists will tell you that what you want to do, right, is maximize your utility. You want to get the most bang for your buck. And so they rely on this idea of the rational actor. Rational actor theory is basically highlighted by the steps that your text talks about in terms of what you do when you face a decision in making. First of all, there's this problem recognition. With regard to food, that problem recognition is usually what? What triggers the problem recognition? Hunger, right? It's a physiological response, right? So you are sitting here in class, it's about 1:30. We got here at 12, it's 1:20, right, 1:20. We got here at 12:30, which is right at lunchtime. So how many of you were hungry when you walked in the door? And I started talking about food, how unfair of me, and thinking about it, which may be why some people have run out of the auditorium already. They decided to engage in that opportunity cost, right? We're going to go eat rather than sit here and listen to Dr. Geary's lecture. So you get this problem recognition, and then you go through an information search. You evaluate alternatives based on that search. You make a purchase decision, and then you make a post-purchase evaluation of that decision, right? Again, this is rational actor theory. So what rational actor theory says is that people pursue goals. That's what this is. We have this problem. We're going to pursue a goal to get rid of the problem. I'm starving to death. What am I going to do? The minute I leave here, I'm going to go meet a bunch of my colleagues over at Old Chicago and have lunch, right? That's my problem, and that's how I'm going to solve it. Now, when we talk about rational actor theory, we have to distinguish between low-level rationality and higher-level rationality, right? So, for example, is it possible to make an irrational decision but go about the execution of that decision in a perfectly rational manner? And I think food may be one of the things that highlights this. Is it possible to pursue an irrational goal in a perfectly rational manner? Yes or no? You think it's possible? How so?
Something you might want to be completely outlandish and way out there, but you can then make steps to make sure that you get to that goal or as close as possible.
Sure. If you're an alcoholic and you want a drink, that may be an irrational goal, right, to get the drink, but you can pursue it absolutely rationally, right, by doing what? Procuring the alcohol in the most expedient fashion, you know, getting home and getting tanked up, right, as fast as you can. That's the absolute rational application of an irrational goal. The extreme example, of course, would be Nazi Germany. If you're going to kill a large number of people in a very rational, comprehensive fashion, they figured out the best way to do it. It was a completely irrational goal, though. So, rational actor theory says it doesn't matter whether the goal is rational or irrational. We have these goals, and we go about pursuing those goals. So when you think about your education, you've made a purchase decision. You decided to come to UCO, right? You decided that you needed a college degree. That's a rational goal. Right? Now, the Hegelian dialectic suggests that when you have a thesis, there will be an antithesis. And that antithesis can lead to what's called a synthesis. And the antithesis of rational actor theory is that people don't really react rationally. Most of the time, we simply react to stimuli in the environment. We walk by the candy bar, the vending machine, and we impulsively buy. We impulsively buy at the counter, right? Which is why we put all of those things that are going to be attractive to children and people who are hungry up on the end caps right by the cash register, right, as you're going out, to get you to make those impulse buys. I think the synthesis would be that sometimes we behave rationally in pursuit of our goals and we go about it very logically, and sometimes we don't. Now the tricky part for consumer behavior research is figuring out when it is that people are making really rational decisions and why they're making those decisions and when they're simply making impulse decisions. So in thinking about this, there's a scholar named Brian Wansink who's a brand scholar at Cornell, and he engages in brand research, particularly on food and consumer behavior. And so he has written a book called Mindless Eating. And we'll see who got the answer to the first question correct.
This book, Mindless Eating. He's director of the Food and Brand Lab at Cornell University, and he's here with me, and we are going to experience mindless eating. What exactly is mindless eating?
Well, mindless eating is eating more than we think we're eating and enjoying it a lot less than we otherwise would.
You mean we can't keep track of how much we're eating?
The typical person makes 200 decisions about food a day. If you were to ask them, they'd believe they made about 15. But in reality, just for breakfast, they decide what cereal to have, whether to pour 1 bowl or 2 bowls, skim milk, whole milk, to have a refill. There's 12 decisions that are made before you even take a bite.
Wow, okay, well, we've got some food here. What might be influencing me or you to eat more than we think we should?
Well, let's look at how much we're going to like it. I can guarantee you're going to like this a lot more than you like this, because this is poached eggs on English muffins. This, on the other hand, is eggs Florentines. Described, it has Norwegian salmon, it's described like detail. Just reading that description of the menu is going to make your expectations that you're going to like the food higher. Having those expectations higher is going to make your taste buds obediently follow.
So even if it doesn't taste good, if I'm impressed by the description, I'll eat more of it?
You may not eat more of it, but you're going to like it a whole lot more. I mean, one thing we found, even with wine, if we give people wine that is from California, they enjoy the food a lot more than they're eating with it. If we tell it's from North Dakota, even though it's the same wine, they don't like the food as much, they end up finishing earlier, and they end up not making reservations very soon.
Now, one obvious thing here is that we have really approximately the same meals. I've got a few onions you don't have, but your plate is about twice as big as mine. What does that do?
What happens is that we find that when people serve themselves onto a bigger plate, they end up putting a lot more food on, typically about 30% more, because look, I mean, that looks like a really nice big meal. This looks like barely an appetizer. In fact, to make these plates look similarly full, I mean, I'm going to have to add a few more potatoes. Now, I think it's looking a little bit better now.
So we make judgments based on whether there's empty spaces there.
Yeah, it's a very subtle bias, because what it does is it suggests to us what the appropriate amount is to eat. And regardless of how tuned in we think we are to our eating decisions, we will serve 25 to 35% more under a larger plate than we will a small plate.
That's a huge amount, though, 25 to 35%.
It's unbelievable. In some cases, with some foods, it can be up to about 150 calories more per serving, which over the course of a year, 150 calories more each day is 15 pounds heavier at the end of the year.
Boy, that's supersizing taken to a different dimension. Okay, so what else? I mean, this looks very straightforward to me. Food on a plate, sure, the sizes are different. But what else might be operating here?
Well, something else that's operating is anytime we think something.
Mind if I start eating?
Oh, man,
Mindlessly.
yeah, that's right. That's right. One other thing that's happening is anytime we see something that we believe is healthy, there's a health halo that follows that entire food. It typically makes us believe it has fewer calories, and it typically makes us overeat. Like I wanted some tomatoes. Look at this. So I get some sauteed tomatoes.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to believe this is an incredibly healthy thing for me to eat. And I guess relative to the French fries, it is healthy. But this is going to have a whole lot more calories than we think, because what's going on is there's a basic sort of halo that surrounds anything that we eat.
Like a tomato.
Like a tomato. How could a tomato be unhealthy? Oh, well, I guess if it's cooked in its own way of olive oil.
Now, you don't just sort of look at people operating restaurants, but you do experiments in your lab. Can you give me a sense of the kinds of things that you do?
Want some bacon?
Well, of course. Now,
well, one of the things we do.
Should I only have like one strip of them?
So that I can have the rest. That's right. One of the things we do in our lab is set up with one-way mirrors, it's set up with hidden cameras, it's got scales underneath the table. And what we can do is we can do experiments to see how the lighting affects how much somebody eats, how the number of people they're eating with influences how much they eat, how candlelight makes them eat more, and things like this. And what it enables us to do is to tell people what cues they can change in their own house so they can eat less and enjoy food more.
Now, but the title of your book is Mindless Eating. Is it really possible for people to sort of step back from that and say, I'm being influenced by all these things that you mentioned in the book, I can correct that? Or is it just too easy to fall into the same old habits?
It's really easy to fall into the same habits. So that's what the key thing to do is just to reorganize, what we call re-engineer your house, so that you don't have to make these decisions all the time, so that you're eating off of smaller plates, you're pouring in your tall, skinny glasses rather than short, wide glasses. You're moving the candy bowl 6 feet away from you rather than leaving it on your desk. That's the sort of thing that, of course, is very easy to do. It's a mindless solution to this.
So, Brian, but what if I'm not in that controlled environment of home? I'm out at a restaurant. What should I do?
Well, in addition to your entree, you can eat one other item. You can have an appetizer, you can have a side dish, you can have a dessert. You can't have all three.
Okay, I'll take it seriously. Thanks, Brian. Dr. Brian Wensink is director of the Food and Brand Lab at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. He's also author of Mindless Eating, Why We Eat More Than We Think.
So the estimated calories shows that in a Thanksgiving dinner. And that was not what most of us eat for Thanksgiving, is it? A 6-ounce piece of turkey. We usually have ham, baked potatoes, casseroles, all kinds of stuff. So you can see how complex the consumer decision-making process is. And this makes it really challenging for marketers to try and figure out what all it is that influences us, right? What kinds of things will influence us, even subtly. They've gotten really good at this in some types of research. For example, particularly with gaming, in the gaming industry, they figured out what kinds of atmospherics will lead people to engage in maybe less than rational decision-making by inserting more money into the slots. What do you think influences those kinds of things? The lights, the color of the carpet actually influences whether or not people will spend more money. The games themselves, what do? They make noise, they light up, they flash. If you hear other people winning, that increases the anxiety, right? What else do they do in casinos?
The oxygen.
The oxygen, they'll give you free alcohol, or they used to in Vegas. They don't do that so much anymore. They'll do it in Tunica still. I was amazed that they still give free drinks out in Tunica, Mississippi. There's almost nothing free in Vegas anymore. They're even giving free cigarettes out in Tunica the last time I was there. The fact that there's no windows in a casino, so that you do what? Lose track of time. All of this has been highly studied in very scientific terms, and in terms of making it rational. So what things will go into our decision making that may make us less than rational? Well, again, I think it goes to the level of risk. How much of us think that there's a big risk in eating? 2 of you think there's a big risk in eating. 3 or 4 of you. There's maybe more risk than you think about, but why is the risk seem less than, let's say, the purchase of a house? It doesn't affect you until you're in your, what, 50s or 60s, when you start having major health problems, things like that, right? So the risk is pushed off. It's one of the reasons why smoking is decreasing among every demographic group except one. What's that demographic group that smoking is still increasing among? What? Yeah, it's young people. And why is that? Because the risk is not immediate, right? And it's one of the things that in biology Martin Lindstrom looks at. The anti-smoking ads actually trigger in people that are smokers the part of the brain which senses pleasure. And so when we show them these ads, they actually they're jonesing for a cigarette. In spite of the fact that there are some of the most horrific images on some of these ads that you see. And we'll talk about advertising. So situational influences, and some of you came up with this, the idea that whether or not you have kids is going to influence you. Other people that are in the household. Look at Maslow's, there's a number of questions on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now what Abraham Maslow says is that we have to meet the needs at a lower level before we can go up in the pyramid. And so I think this sort of looks at things that limit choices. You all probably have an enormous amount of choices because most of your needs are being met, right? If you're poor and you're living as a peasant, say, in a third world country, your choices in food are going to be greatly reduced. By what? The number of options you have, and simply by the fact that you're looking for shelter and enough caloric intake to survive, right? Once those physiological needs are met, then we start looking at safety. And if you think about this, at the lower levels of the pyramid at least, it sort of makes sense. Would you, for example, engage in more risky behavior which somebody may consider to be an irrational choice if you're starving to death? Yeah, what would you do? You might go steal something if you're starving to death, right? You might engage in riskier behavior that other people might view as being irrational if, in fact, your needs at the lower level are not being met. At the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. Maslow says most people never get to that level of the pyramid. Again, with the risk, though, that we see, we think that we become more rational. But let's think about this example. I used to think that people buying a house would be enormously rational. And for the most part, I guess they are, aren't they? But can you have a mix of rational and irrational factors that influence the decision? So what kinds of things, most of you probably want to buy a house. What kinds of things are going to influence the decision on your purchase of a house? Location. In real estate, they say location is everything, right? It's location, location, location. What's the big factor in the purchase of the house in terms of location? Neighborhood. How about school district? School district's an enormously important factor in the purchase of a house. I used to own a home in Edgemere Park, which is a historic community that is just south of 36th Street. 36th Street is the street that has the domed church, the really ugly white church with the really ugly steeple. And it runs from 36th between Robinson and Dewey and about 30th Street, and in that little area. And it was amazing to me when we bought our house in there, how many of our friends and neighbors moved out because they had children. They bought a house as dinks, which is what we were at the time. That stands for double income, no kids. And the minute that they got kids, they moved out of Edgemere because they didn't want their kids to be in Oklahoma City public schools. Where do you think they moved? Edmonton. They moved to Edmonton because the school district was perceived as being better, right? So I think that's a rational choice. But then when you start getting into the choices, once you've limited it based on this rational analysis, what other kinds of things do you think influence people in terms of buying a house? Down payment requirement, okay? That's certainly rational. You either have the money or you don't. You need to save the money, so that's a cost factor, which is completely rational. What else?
Homeowner's fees.
What?
Homeowner fees.
Homeowner fees, another rational application, right? Some neighborhoods, particularly the gated neighborhoods in Edmond, have homeowners association dues that you have to pay for things like what? The security, right? If you live in a condo, it covers the cost of the maintenance of the common areas. What else? The what? The size of the home. Now, is that rational or irrational? I think people convince themselves that it's a rational decision when in fact maybe it's not. We all think that we need how many bedrooms in a home? 4? Who said 4? Why do you think you need 4?
Even if you're single, you just want more space, maybe for a game room or an extra guest room or something.
Your master bedroom and maybe 2 kids rooms and then 1 room for guests.
Okay, do kids all need their own rooms?
I didn't have one.
It's amazing to me how many children, and of course my brother and I grew up, we both had our own room. And so we never had to share, which was kind of unusual. But do you really need separate rooms for each kid? Lots of families now think that they do. Do you really?
We have a brother and a sister now.
Okay, if you have opposite gender, lots of people want at least one of each, right? So maybe that's rational. Where does that 4th bedroom come from then?
I just always thought it was 3 bedroom, 2 bath.
3 bedroom, 2 bath, okay, that's pretty rational. You can have the parents' rooms and one for a girl and a boy if you have them. And grandma can sleep on the couch when she comes over, right? A lot of people now think they have to have that 4th bedroom for guests, but how many people actually entertain and have guests spend the night in their homes anymore? Not many, why not? Send grandma to the hotel, right? The in-laws get annoying after a while, don't they? So maybe size, I think we think it's rational and it may not be. My mother owned a real estate company and I'll never forget we had a house listed for sale and she'd gone in and told the people, this is an example of how it may not always be rational. She went in and told the people as part of her analysis that they needed to change the carpet. And they said, we don't want to change the carpet, we'll give them a carpeting allowance. Or, we'll just say we'll give you $2,000 to recarpet the house. Everybody that walked in, after 3 months on the market, when they hadn't sold it, we finally convinced them to change the carpet. Everyone walked in and said, yeah, the house down the street had new carpet. Now, is that really rational? If you're rational, you think what? I'd rather have a carpeting allowance because I can choose the color of carpet that I want. But people can't visualize that. And so they limit their own choices, right, by what they're presented with. One of the reasons that I got the house that I got in Edgemere as cheaply as I got it, Edgemere is a very popular location in the city, was because the couple who had owned it before us had large Great Danes that they kept inside the house, and I'm convinced, Great Danes slobber a lot. They slobbered all over the walls, right? And you walked in the house and it reeked of Great Dane dog, right? It reeked of slobber and a little bit of dog urine. And the house stayed on the market. We got it for a really incredible price. I could see that there were hardwood floors and throughout. It would be easy to clean up, right? Get rid of the smell, just put a new set of lacquer, lacquer on the floor and paint the walls and you take care of the dog smell. But nobody else can get past that smell, I'm convinced of it. So it's maybe a combination of those factors. Even when the risk is perceived as pretty great. We also learn, you should look at and go online. There are several questions on the test about the vowels, identifying what motivates you. You can go online and take that test, and you probably should. It's pretty interesting to see what type of lifestyle you have and how that influences your purchasing and decision making. Look at the part in your textbook on word of mouth. Word of mouth is enormously important. In the past, we used to say in marketing that if people really liked you, they might tell 2 or 3 people about your business. If they hated you, they would tell 10. That's no longer true. If people like you, they may tell 2 or 3 people. They may get online and write a review. But I can tell you that if they don't like you, they absolutely will. get online and slam you. And it is devastating to a lot of businesses to have reviews written about them. And what negative word of mouth in WOM can do to a business in terms of totally destroying it in this age where you have the ability to not tell one person, but to tell the entire world about an experience with a business that you are unsatisfied with. Particularly if you get on things like, how many of you use TripAdvisor to look up where you're going to stay? It's an enormously powerful tool. Again, this is one way that it connects with a previous chapter on marketing research. That's one of the things in environmental scanning that businesses need to do. They need to get online and know what their reputation is online and understand that as part of the environmental scan. So it goes this consumer behavior and that ability to engage in WOM or WOM, word of mouth, positive word of mouth is enormously important. I need your tests back and also your papers for today. And the roll sheet make it all the way around? You need to sign the roll sheet if you didn't.